Welcome to Life by Design, episode 318. Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Cratio Jug.
As always, happy to be here and excited to talk about today's topic.
We are creators of Life by Design with 25 plus certified locations worldwide. Many locations worldwide. Each week on the show, we discuss the principles and the practice. Today, we're talking about habits. And I do love this quote that you have in the show notes, Cratio. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. And it's so true. And I've seen that quote numerous times, used it myself. It's Aristotle, which, by the way, is Cratio's son. And I think that it really encapsulates a lot of either why people are successful or why people fail. So let's talk about it today, Cratio. We'll share with our listeners why we think habits are important, how to try and create some habits, some of the struggles that people have and how we have overcome them, and some of the struggles that we also have as we try to create our own habits.
Yeah, I think that we should start by explaining the quote. I think it's kind of misleading in the sense that we tend to judge, at least I did for a really long time. You know, you tend to judge whether you're excellent or not by the results that you're getting, right? Where I think that, and what I'm learning is that successful people really judge based on their effort and the work that they did, because they understand that the results, there's other things that influence results other than just your effort.
Right. No, I think that's exactly it. And we put a lot of emphasis on the outcomes. And, you know, it's easy to do that because obviously when you have that thing or that experience that you set out to have, you often have the emotions of the success of that. And so it's easy to tie those two things together. But as you alluded to, successful people also have emotional responses to carrying out the act. Not to say, or carrying out the habit, but not to say every single day. You know, it's not like getting up. One of the habits that I've created over the last 2 years is getting up between 4 and 4:20 every single day, at least through the course of the week. And so, you know, one of the things that happens when we wake up at that time, it's not like I jump out of bed and celebrate. There's not an emotional, oh, this is amazing, I'm feeling the effects of carrying out this habit, versus, you know, at the end of 90 days and say I've accomplished something in those hours. That's where you feel the emotional reward from that. So I think part of that, probably, Cratio, maybe you can speak to this, is it's not that exciting to carry out the habits themselves, even though we want the outcome at the end.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I think sometimes it can be. I mean, I'm back to playing the guitar regularly, and you know that involves learning songs and struggling to find new things. I don't, you know, it's nice to learn a piece really well, but I'm enjoying just the process of playing it. So I think sometimes you're right. I think sometimes we can enjoy the results and we understand that this is something that we're going to have to do to get there. But I think things really get fun when you actually like doing the work.
Yes. And that's, I guess, where I was getting at, is some habits are going to be enjoyable. So, you know, there's certain habits that are going to be a lot of fun to carry out. And then there's certain habits like getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning that aren't going to be as enjoyable to carry out.
Yeah. Yes. So go ahead.
Why don't we talk about, you know, what would be your definition of a habit, just so our listeners understand exactly what we're talking about?
So a habit is, I mean, there's a stimulus, right? This is from, I think, and I don't have it in front of me, so I apologize if I don't get all the steps correct, but I think it's from Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit. So there's the stimulus, and then there's the response to the stimulus, and then there's the outcome, right? So those are the three things necessary to create a habit. And I think what we're talking about today is we are going to be talking about the conscious habits that we have created to get and to drive the results that we want. Because I think when we look at our behavior, there's lots of habits that we're either conscious or unconscious about. You know, and I always love Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach's quote that right now you're the sum of all of your habits. Like your results right now are perfectly suited to the habits that you've created.
Okay. And so now we know what a habit is. Yes. Where do we start? I know we're talking about the habits. To me are, you know, they're I don't want to say the final product on the the strategy side, but obviously you're starting at this big top level overview and you're narrowing it down, and then you create the habit, and then you carry the habit out and go back up and try and create a result. So somebody listening in, other than saying, hey, go listen to or go read Think by Design or do the 30-day challenge, where do we start as a general overview here?
Well, where we always start. We start with what you want, right? Like, we're humans. There's nothing determining our path. We get to choose everything. We get to select what's important, what's not important. So you always start with the end. What's your goal? What's your vision? What do you want? Right? Simply put, where do you want to get to? And how is that different from where you are now? Right? So a simple goal would be like, I want to lose 30 pounds. Like, that's a pretty good goal. That's specific. You know what you want. You know what would it look like. So you'd have to start there first.
Okay. And so let's say we create this vision. You could use exercise, or we stick with the health category if we can. I think that makes sense to a lot of people listening in. So let's say that I know I always come back to the same vision every time, losing 10 pounds, because it's so universal. It's something that if you ask people across the board, how many people, if you said, hey, do you want, could I lose 10 pounds? I think you'd probably get almost a 95% response rate.
Yeah, but it's tangible, right? It's something that is understandable. It's relatively simple in its mechanics. Right. Like, your goal could be, I want to create Amazon, but that's hard to create those habits. And we don't have Amazon. We're not Jeff Bezos. So we don't we haven't been there. We don't know what that looks like.
Okay.
Right. So, lose 10 pounds. Right. So again, linking it back to the 6 pillars of self-esteem that Think by Design. So the first thing that you've done is you become aware of what you wanted. Now, I guess it's become aware of where you're going to create, what's your strategy going to be, right? So you have to start with your goals. Then the next thing is, what's your strategy in general? And when it comes to things like losing weight, the strategy is going to be something around, I need to eat better and I need to move my body more. Right. And then once you have those, then the next thing you can decide is, what strategy am I going to follow? Am I going to go paleo? Am I going to macro count? Am I going to join CrossFit? Am I going to go to the gym on my own? I'm going to try to do this on my own. What knowledge do I have to get? And once you start to get to that specific level, now you can create habits around those things.
Yeah, so let's stop there for a second, Chris, because I think, that gap is one that, we've crossed many, many times. And it's one now that it's, second nature to us. We understand that's the process, but I think that's the actual sticking people, right? Is they have the vision. They've kind of mapped out the goal. I think that they go from there and they try and create the habit, whether they know what the habit is or not. And of course they get stuck there because they're not really sure what to do. They don't actually ask those questions that you were just asking.
Right. So the first thing is knowledge, right? Okay, I need to lose 10 pounds. I understand, I'm knowledgeable enough to understand that it's going to be diet and exercise. So what diet and what exercise? Right. So how do you bridge that gap? So the first one is knowledge. And where are you going to get the knowledge from? Right. Like, are you going to read a book? Are you going to hire a coach? Are you going to hire a personal trainer? Are you going to do the paleo thing? Are you going to do the vegan thing? Are you going to do the Atkins thing? Like, these are all things that you have to decide on. And you have to increase your knowledge in that area. And I've just given you, podcasts and books and coaches. And the trap always is that you need to learn more, right? I need to learn more. And I've been there many times. There's been lots of times where I've just been reading and studying and I've not been executing. Eventually you have to execute and pull a strategy. And now the strategy or the habit could be, I need to create a habit around how I'm going to learn about these things, right? So maybe, going back to stimulus, response and what you're looking to create. So maybe the stimulus that you're looking for is an alarm goes off, or you turn your car on and that triggers you to put on a podcast or to hire a coach, whatever, so we can talk about creating the specific habits,
right?
But you have to decide, whether it's going to be a habit around knowledge, if you're just starting out, a habit around strategy. So now I have knowledge, I'm going to join CrossFit and I'm going to eat paleo. How do you actually execute that? What do those habits look like? When are you going to train? What happens when you become unmotivated? How are you going to meal prep, right? Like, asking yourself these questions, and then it's the measure, and then it's the execution of that. Like, so next, after you've drawn the plan out and you're, created how and what's going to trigger you to do these things, based on stimulus, response, and reward, how are you going to have a feedback loop and you start again, like when you have new results to go by, right? And that's the cycle that repeats itself over and over and over again.
Okay, so let's say that now somebody's gone through the steps, they've got the vision, they've narrowed down a specific goal that they want to accomplish over a timeline, and they've done the research, they've decided, hey, it makes more sense to, train in a, high intensity interval type training, strength training, and I'm going to eat by design. Okay, I've got all those things. That's a lot of possible habits to implement at one time.
Yep.
How do we decide, one, which ones to implement? And, is there a limit in your mind on how many habits are going to be ideal to take on at one time?
Yeah, one. Right? You start.
Okay, so how do we know which one?
You start with one. You don't. You just pick one and you go with it. Right?
Okay.
This is why having feedback cycles is so important.
Right.
There's no guarantees, right? Like we're looking for, and we're used to this life where things are safe and things are guaranteed. The real reality of life is nothing's safe and nothing's guaranteed. It's life. The fact that just a testament to how wonderful our society is that there's some guarantees and there's some safety. But like the truth of the matter is, you don't know. You don't know if the exercise or the diet is going to prompt you to get the results that you want the fastest. So you're going to pick one, right? Based on whatever level of knowledge or information that you have. And that's where you're going to start. Right. Okay. So I'm more than okay with somebody not changing their diet at all and adding training to their life. I think that's phenomenal. And I think that'll be more, from personal experience, especially when I'm starting something new that's very challenging and I don't know it. That's more than enough, like mental concentration just to execute that one thing really well.
Right. And really important points. I think this is where, again, we're going through the steps. You can see there's so many possible places where people are going to fall off, right? As you go from 1 to 2 to 3 and all the way down. And so in that sense, I like your idea of just choosing one and going with it.
Well, it's counter to like what's presented in real life, right? Like, or on social media, like you look through these people's pages and, people follow like Matt, like for training, people follow these CrossFit people and, Matt Frazier and the people who you see at the gym. But like the people who I see at the gym that are really fit and they can do like, 30 muscle ups, they've been training for 17 years. Like they've had this habit since their nerve system has been super plastic, like since they were 5-6 years old, and they've been doing it for 17 years. Now here I am after, 30 years of not really being strong or mobile. Like it's unrealistic to expect me to be able to do that after a year or two.
Right. No, I think that, if I'm just a layperson, I'm thinking, again, going back to our 10-pound example, I think also when you're choosing your habits, one of those strategies is you said you pick anything, but I think it probably makes sense to pick something that you think is going to be probably the easiest to do. Not necessarily the thing that's going to have the biggest impact, because I think that the nice thing about habits are once one's in place and it truly becomes habitual and ritualized, it's something that you're going to have a much easier time keeping up over and over and over again. And so think about it more in terms of how am I going to be successful over the long haul? And it's going to be taking small, easy to do things and stacking them one on top of the other over time versus you take on one that is too big. Even though you might believe and think and know that it's going to yield the biggest results, there's a much greater chance you're going to not actually complete it. And of course, then you're going to fail and fall off.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up that point. So in that Power of Habits book, he calls them keystone habits. And you have no idea what these things are. But there's certain habits that you're going to undertake that automatically, if doing them well, are going to lead you to have better habits in other aspects of your life. Right? Like we were talking about, one of the most important things that you've done is learning how to wake up, between 4:20 and 4:40. I would argue for you, Jamie, knowing you and your life story, that's a keystone habit. The fact that you're up at that hour, all these other things are now falling into place because you have that keystone habit in place.
Right. No, I like that. That's good. That's again, waking up at 4 o'clock is probably not the easiest to pick. So
sure,
we're still talking about this difference with keystone habits versus the easiest habits. So you can see, guys, as you're listening, it's
complicated.
It's complicated. So I think Cratio's take-home point is pick something that you're actually going to be able to ritualize. Create the system around that. So the cue and the routine, and of course, having the reward in place and, starting to create that and really anchor that in. And there's lots of psychological, neurological components to all of this. And I think that, maybe finish up, Horatio, by sharing for you, what do you think has been over the last, say, year or two? What has been the number one most powerful routine that you've put in place that is now what you would consider to be a habit?
Sure. So let me just address one more point that I think is super valuable is patience and consistency, right? Like you're going to try this and it's going to be hard and there's going to be certain days where you don't do it and that's okay, right? Get back on. Like I would literally just focus. That's why it's one thing. Because if you're devoting energy and time to just making one thing happen, there's a lot higher percentage and probability that you're going to make it happen. And then just be patient, right? Like we were just talking in the pre-show about marketing and about, how when we first started out in chiropractic, how we were terribly impatient. We wanted, and that just leads to other bad habits. So I think just the patience thing, and even in the book, he talks about it. We hear that, it takes 22 days to change a habit, which is far underweighing the more realistic 150 days is what it typically takes before something's habitual in your life. So just think about 150 days. That's like 6 months. Right. So that's it. So the one habit for me that's been the most important is definitely journaling in the morning. If you've listened to the podcast long enough, and then of course, Jamie, I want to hear what yours is because I'm always learning from you, but I'm an anxious thinker. Now, being an anxious thinker, and again, anxiety to me doesn't mean the feeling of anxiety. Anxiety to me is a mental processing. It's a way of thinking. And I'm always thinking about the future. And because my natural state is to always think about the future, I create all these wonderful and sometimes, unfortunately, not wonderful scenarios that, in quotation marks, could happen in the future. Most of the time, they don't even come close to happening in the future. But the stress and anxiety that I feel about that pretend scenario is very real. So journaling has helped me keep my mind focused on what it is that I can actually do and what's happening right now in the present moment, and not creating these fantastical, mythical stories about the future.
That was a pretty deep share there, Horatio.
It's true, man. It's been amazing. The days where I journal and the days where I can stay on point and just be happy with what's happening right now and understand that the habits that I've created are going to project me into the future that I want. Those are the days where I'm at my best versus the days where I have, when many things are happening and I'm trying to escape from the moment or I'm looking towards the next thing, my mind gets away from me, and those are not my best days.
Right. No.
And yourself?
Well, I think we've already talked about it. And so for me, it's simply been getting up earlier and not to say that 5:30, 6 o'clock wasn't early, because that's for many people, that's early. And, it's very valuable, but there's just something about being at the office. So I'm, generally at my desk at the office by 5 o'clock, coffee in hand, ready to go every single day. So in order to do that, get here on time, go through my morning routine. I get up at 4 to 4:20, pretty much Monday through Friday. And again, that's just been such a life-changing impact for me. And I'm, of course, still trying to figure out the whole go to bed before midnight type thing. So 4 hours of sleep probably isn't ideal from a physiological perspective, but it's definitely wonderful from a productivity standpoint.
Nice. It's great.
Yeah. So lots of good stuff on habits today, guys. I'd love to see you pick one habit, get into place, and action that over the next 6 months, as we talked about. You can go and check out the download, which is the Think by Design manual. That's a freebie there. You can also take the 30-day challenge. That's a freebie too. So check those out in the show notes at lifebydesign.com/podcast. And thank you, as always, for joining the drive to 1 million families worldwide living life by design.